Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the.
I will share the slides.
Okay.
Actually,
And
I have an updated version here.
Uh,
Um,
Dr. Kumar, before your version comes, it'll be my presentation.
I see. Okay,
So yours will come later on.
got it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hindu Physicians International Distinguished Physician Lecture Series. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I am the president of the Hindu Physicians International. As you see on the slide, HPI mantra is Sharira Madhyam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. Basically, that means that body is the first temple for you. And that holds true not just for our patients, but for ourselves also. If physicians don't have a healthy body, they will not be able to take care of their patients. So it's our first and foremost duty first to take care of our own bodies and then take care of our patients. Just for the sake of record, today is Sunday, May 3rd, 2026. It is 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our distinguished speaker today is Dr. Anoop Kumar, and he will be speaking on the science of consciousness and health transformation. A little bit of introduction about HPI. HPI, or Hindu Physicians International, is a faith based charity by physicians of dharmic origin to serve the entire humanity. We have a self governing board of directors with 5 members. We are registered as a non-profit in the state of New York. Why? What is the concept behind HPI? So, we basically believe in the Sanatan concepts of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the entire world is our family. We believe in concepts like Naraseva, Narayan Seva, which means the service of humanity is the service of the God. So, those are the kinds of concepts we work on in Hindu Physicians International. Why did we need to have this kind of faith based charity of dharmic physicians? And the reason for that, there are a multitude of faith based medical charities that provide what is called HADA, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, based on their set of ideals and objectives. And what I found glaring was the absence of a Hindu platform by Hindu physicians or doctors. So we felt that there was no better time than this to start a platform of physicians who follow Sanatan Dharma, whether it is Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, or Sikh faith, to have a faith based charitable organization through which we can do local or international charitable activities. Now, this slide gives you the names of the members of the board of directors. I will not go into that. We have a international advisory board, uh, people of eminence who provide us advice. They don't work in day-to-day capacity. And this is the executive committee of Hindu Physicians International. We do have a medical student also on this. And we have Dr. Dipali Desai as Director of Outreach for Dharma Organizations. What are objectives? We have short term objectives and long term objectives. We are a very new organization taking baby steps. Our short term objectives are doing community seva or community service activities worldwide in a very decentralized manner. Long term objectives are to create rapid response medical teams, provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, promote prevention, research, and access to treatment for common illnesses, assist in availability of clean water, and prevent and mitigate environmental degradation that we have seen so far. We have our website. If anyone wants to become a member of Hindu Physicians International, please go on to our website. Membership is free. All you do is fill up a membership form, whether you are a physician, surgeon, or whether you belong to allied professions, whether you are a radiographer, you are a phlebotomist, you are a nurse, you are a dietitian, you are a psychologist. We welcome all of you who are involved in healthcare as volunteer members of Hindu Physicians International. There's a Google form which is called Community Seva Projects. So if you are running a humanitarian project, you could actually fill those details into HPI Community Seva form, and we will certify that as an HPI endorsed activity. You retain your full control. We do not interfere in the running of your community service project. And if you want to contact us, our email is hpiseva@gmail.com. So today we have this Distinguished Hindu Physician Lecture Series, and you see the picture of our honorable speaker, Dr. Anoop Kumar. Those of you who were attracted by this flyer probably use this information to register for this. So Dr. Anoop Kumar is an emergency physician based in Washington, D.C. He communicates a transformative vision of healthcare system reimagined for our cultural moment, when the Newtonian matter first paradigm is giving way to a deeper recognition of consciousness as being fundamental to health. He has been talking about moral injury. He is a co-founder and CEO of an organization called Numo Core. He is leading the way towards a system centered on healing, cure, and human flourishing. A little bit about on our own organization. We have focused on seva or community service activities. So Hindu Physicians International will be participating on June 6th in the walkathon for charitable reasons organized by BAPS charity organizations in Cleveland area. These are some of other HPI seva activities in conjunction with the Rotary Club done by our General Secretary, Dr. Sharma. We supported Cleveland Food Bank, provided 20,000 free meals. These are some of the pictures from that. So in a sense, there are a number of community seva projects we are doing. This shows actually the wigs given to survivors of CA breast who lose their hair and things like that. So we encourage you to get involved in your community and be part of the community service. And if you want to support Hindu Physicians International, please go on to our website. There is a PayPal link, or you can mail a check to Hindu Physicians International for supporting our community service activities. And before I hand over the platform to Dr. Anoop Kumar, I will just chant this Swasti Vachan. Om Swasti na Indro Vradrashavaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedaha Swasti Nastakshyo Arishtanamehi Swasti no Brahspatir Dadhatu Om Shanti Shanti Om. And now I'm done with my introduction, and I invite our honorable guest, Dr. Anoop Kumar, to start his presentation. Dr. Anoop Kumar, you can try to run your own PowerPoint. If you are not able to do that, Dr. Vikas Jain will run it for you. Dr. Jain, you can make him the host, please. Dr. Anoop Kumar, kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, can everybody see this? Yes, great. First, I usually like to just jump in 100% to my presentations, but this time I want to do a short preamble because it's really nice to be able to talk to fellow physicians. I know many people are here that are not physicians also, and everyone's welcome. This is for everyone. But I also am speaking very particularly here to the role of physicians in a great change that's happening in our society. I believe there is a major transformation happening in our society now. where we are going to a deeper understanding of science, of human nature, and of cosmology that has profound implications for healthcare. It's very easy to talk about these things as spirituality. It's very easy to talk about these things as only philosophy. I want to talk about them today as medical science. I want to talk about them as patient care, as healing, and scaling a true health system with a focus on healing, cure, and human potential. I believe that integration is the time. That's this time. And I believe physicians have a role to play, and we'll see what that is. Does the brain produce consciousness? Or is the brain a pattern of consciousness? So, Aitreya Upanishad says, Prajnanam Brahma.
Yeah, please share your slides.
You cannot see this?
No, please share your slides.
It says you are screen sharing.
Yeah, we can see it.
We can
Okay.
see your slides, sir. We
Yes,
can see
yes.
your slides.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so Aitreya says, so by the way, there's this URL at the top. If you cannot see the slides, you can directly go to pneumocore.health/presentations/HPI. You can view it also. Okay. So when Aitreya says Prajnanam Brahma, or consciousness is reality, it is not just saying that it is in my head, or it's in your head, or it's in your mind. Because it's easy to interpret this as a spiritual statement and leave it as is. But in fact, it's saying something much deeper, that what we are talking about consciousness is something that is prior to the subject and the object, and that is of the nature of that undifferentiated reality from which the individual consciousness and the physical world springs. Okay, if it's a Sunday and you're in a temple or a church and you're having the conversation, people might say, okay, great. Or if people say, well, that's a nice spiritual statement. Yeah, maybe it's true. But if you say it in the middle of a medical conference, you'll hear a few words. Well, I think that's kind of pseudoscience. Well, that's quackery. Quacks talk like that. Well, that's dogma. It's just dogma. It's not really science. These are very particular words that come up in the context of a deeper conversation about human nature. And by the way, physicians are in the business of human nature. Human nature is what we call anatomy. It's just a different name for the same thing. So why do these words come up? Why is it okay at home or in friend circles or philosophy circles, but when we try to talk about it seriously, why do words like quackery or pseudoscience or dogma come up? There's a very particular reason, and we'll come to that. So what we'll cover today is some of the evidence, why we believe what we do, some science of consciousness, the current model and what it costs us, and we'll look at anatomy and the new health system and the relationship between these. So let's look at some of the evidence. Psychedelic use. Profound changes in consciousness were observed with psilocybin, but surprisingly, only decreases in cerebral blood flow were seen. All right, so let's think about this. A person using psilocybin is having intense experiences, much more intense than the regular experience, more vivid, more colors, more meaningful, more intense, but blood flow to the brain is less. Well, if the brain is producing consciousness and all that neuronal activity is what's contributing to consciousness and the rich and the varied experience, well, then you should see more blood flow to the brain. But in fact, there was an absolute decrease in blood flow. Decreased brain activity, decreased activity in the connector hub actually predicted the intensity of experience, right? So you could just look at the level of activity and then predict how intense was the experience. There was an inverse relationship. Well, if the brain is producing consciousness, how is that happening? Well, there's something called the filter hypothesis of consciousness, which says that, well, maybe the brain is just a filter. So maybe it is true that consciousness is something beyond the brain, and in which case, the brain acts as a filter, a reducing agent for this infinite field or large field of consciousness. It reduces it in some way and gives some kind of smaller experience. Then it would make sense that psychedelics reduce blood flow, decreasing the filter activity, and you get a greater experience. Well, hold that thought. Let's look at this in some more detail. This is my favorite title for an article of all time. Is your brain really necessary? This is written by Roger Lewin, reporting on John Lorber, who was a neurologist that studied cases of hydrocephalus. And if you look at this second set of images and third set of images, all that dark space, right, for the non-physicians here, the dark space is just fluid. There's no brain material. This on the left is much closer to a normal brain. You can see the gray matter, the white matter. All that is just fluid in these images. And yet what he found, he studied about 600 patients or so, and he looked at the most severe cases, right? So about 60 of those 600 were the most severe, in which 95% of brain tissue was gone. All right, so imagine a person has a stroke and maybe a couple percent of the brain is affected, and you can see something severe. In this case, 95% of the brain was gone in about these 60 people. And in half of those cases, there was debility. There was severe debilitation. In half of the cases, they had average to above average intelligence. Okay, I'll say that again. 95% loss of brain tissue with average to above average intelligence in about half the cases. Well, if the brain is a filter, and if 95% of your filter is gone, you should be way out there. But that's not the case either. So what exactly is the relationship between the brain and consciousness? This is what he wrote, Lorber, who was a neurologist, by the way. There's a young student at this university who has an IQ of 126, first-class honors in math, and is completely normal socially. And yet the boy has virtually no brain. And in fact, the only reason they found out is because they thought his head looked a little big. So they referred him, did some studies, and found that there was hardly any brain in his skull. So does the brain really produce consciousness? And is the brain even a filter of consciousness? Another piece of evidence, children who remember previous lives. The Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, for decades, has studied thousands of cases that we don't study in medical school. It doesn't even show up in medical journals for the most part. Thousands of cases of children who say they remember previous lives. They remember details of how they died. They remember particulars of who they were. They remember the family members, patterns, etc. And in many cases, these are actually confirmed by the researchers. Obviously, this is ongoing research at the university. It's not just they believe it and write it down. In one case, a kid made 13 verifiable statements about a deceased granduncle, including the mode of death, their favorite childhood toy, and this child even had a defect in the skull at the site of a major firearm injury, which is where the granduncle was injured at the time of death. Well, if the brain is producing consciousness, and if these memories are all stored with the brain, and the person dies, and the brain dies, how do all of these memories get transferred to another human being who's separate in space and time and physiology and anatomy? My friends, there is good evidence that the brain does not produce consciousness. There's certainly a close relationship. There's evidence that even the filter hypothesis is insufficient. So here's a question, pretty obvious one. Why do we believe it? If there is evidence that the brain may not be producing consciousness, why do we believe it? We cannot say actually it's medical school, because in medical school, I never learned, nobody ever sat me down and says, hey, Anoop, listen, the brain produces consciousness, okay? Nobody said that. In neurology, when we took neurology, there was no neurologist who said, listen here, the brain produces consciousness, okay? Don't forget it. Don't get it backwards. Nobody said that. Why? They didn't have to say it. It was assumed since childhood, right? It's not even a question. Only when a question comes up do we question, why do we believe this? It will be like walking into grand rounds and starting by saying, people walk on 2 feet, right? Nobody would say that. Why? Because it's not even a question. And the same thing happens here. This didn't start in medical school. It started as a kid. It started in elementary school, grade school, and so on. And it gets cemented in medical school because the more we believe this, the more we get good grades, the more we keep speaking at conferences. Here's part of why we believe it. That's what we're getting to. If you look back thousands of years at indigenous traditions, they believed a more consciousness is fundamental framework, right? In Hinduism, Advaita, idealism, objective idealism, or analytic idealism. And for a lot of history, it was either that or panpsychism, which says that consciousness is fundamental and so is matter. They're both fundamental. Whereas idealism and Advaita say, no, consciousness is fundamental and matter is expression or pattern or representation. So you had all of these traditions, holistic traditions, eclectic traditions, of course, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, yoga, Unani, all of these that had a deeper view. Until about 1900, when we had the situation where there were a whole bunch of different medical sects, like homeopathy and chiropractic came along, then there was magnetic medicine. There were all of these different systems. And people didn't know what's what really works, what doesn't work, how do we make sense of it? It wasn't really clear. And so what happened at that time is the American Medical Association, which of course favored the physical model, said, hey, we're going to conduct this study called the Flexner Report. So the Carnegie Foundation helped to fund it. They found this guy, Abraham Flexner, and they did a report on the state of healthcare, the state of medicine. And they said that, you know what, all this other stuff doesn't make sense. Now, he didn't really study Ayurveda or yoga or Advaita or all of these objective idealism. There's no mention of these in the report. But nonetheless, he took a philosophical premise that physical stuff is primary. And out of that, he created a scientific directive saying that this is what science is. Biochemistry, biological science, this is what constitutes science because that's where I'm coming from. That's my philosophical assumption. And from here on out, what will get funded is this kind of science. Now, since then, we have realized that when you have only that kind of science, something's missing. And therefore, alternative medicine came, complementary medicine came, and integrative medicine ultimately, which is popular now. But they haven't yet solved the fundamental knowledge problem at the root of this, which is asking the question of what are the assumptions on top of which we are developing our science. And if you look in the entire history of thousands of years, this physicalist approach that allopathy generally takes and the Flexner Report supports is relatively small. It's like 100 years, 150 years. Of course, it goes on right now. But that its growth was rapid in the 1900s because of this Flexner Report and the funding that it received. If you didn't adhere to it, you didn't get funded as a medical school. And so it's really important for physicians. I would say in our education, one of the most important things as we step back again into this time that we're in and what's happening in this era, it's important to understand why we believe the things that we believe. It's important to know why we have created the schism within ourselves, where some things are okay in spirituality and philosophy and on the weekend and with friends, and professionalism is a totally different kind of knowledge. Why do we believe that? In fact, can we bring rigor and integrate these both? We can, if we know why we believe what we believe. So that first quote in the beginning, consciousness is fundamental or consciousness is reality. Remember what happens when some of these things come up, pseudoscience, quackery, dogma. Where do those words come from? These are quotes from the Flexner Report, right? Modern medicine has little sympathy for allopathy as for homeopathy. He's basically saying that we want really science. It's not about favoritism. It wants not dogma, but facts. The sectarian begins with his mind made up. But in fact, Flexner is describing himself because he has not even considered that a consciousness-based perspective could be scientific. To plead in advance a principle couched in pseudo-scientific language is to violate scientific quality. Once granted the possibility of medical dogma, there's no limit to the number of dissenting sects, and they are unconscionable quacks. So we see this language, and we see this rhetoric today. This is where it comes from. Now, again, okay, big deal. Somebody writes a report. Why is it such a big deal? If very few physicians understand this history, how could it really be influencing us? Well, what happened is this. The state boards are the instruments through which the reconstruction of medical education will be largely affected. So in the name of getting more rigorous science, which is important, in the name of knowing which treatments actually work and which do not, which is important, in the name of bringing a greater level of transparency and clarity to the public and minimizing harm, all of which are important, in fact, a kind of dogma was institutionalized. And look at the rhetoric. Science, once embraced, will conquer the whole. The remaining schools are filthy and bare and they're grimy. The osteopathic schools reek with commercialism. So this is much more of a rhetorical document without looking at the underlying science and considering all approaches. Again, it was funded by the Carnegie Foundation and ultimately the Rockefeller Foundation, its implementation. Abraham Flexner was a part of it, and Standard Oil, part of the Rockefeller Foundation from the Rockefellers, that their materials became the petrochemicals of the pharmaceutical industry. So on one side, we are defining the science and saying matter is science, the physical stuff is science, the other stuff we're not even going to look at, we're not considering it. And once you define that as science and you define the human being as a physical structure, on the other side, you introduce the solution to the very same thing, which is the drugs with the receptors that match the physical anatomy. It's the definition of the medical industry, at least the allopathic medical industry as we understand it today. Okay, but how does it become so popular? Right? If there are many problems with it, if there are shortcomings, then how does it become so dominant? In the last 100 years, $50 to $100 trillion in research supporting a physicalist leaning paradigm. Maybe 1 trillion or so on a consciousness-based paradigm. And even today, the biggest problem in integrative medicine, which is a welcome change, which is refreshing, is that integrative medicine largely is still trying to jam itself into a physicalist paradigm, right? So yes, meditation is good, but it's still fundamentally body first, right? Tai Chi is good, but it's explained in terms of this. Whenever we try to explain something in the mind-body space today, you will say that psychoneuroimmunology is always invoked. I do it myself because it's an important bridge between the physical and consciousness. Psycho, mind, neuro, body, immunology. However, just because you put them side by side doesn't mean we're actually explaining anything, right? What is the actual relationship between mind and body, not just putting them side by side? So again, that is still a physicalist leaning paradigm or a panpsychist leaning paradigm. But a consciousness-based paradigm, we don't even have the language and the notation for to start examining. And therefore, once you define something and you fund it with trillions of dollars, this is the method of the creation of science. Does it mean the science is wrong? No. Does it mean it's invalid? No. Does it mean it doesn't help people? No. I use the very same science in the emergency department all the time. However, it is a fraction of what is possible when it comes to healing, and it often limits healing because of its limited view of the human being. So it's not about throwing away what we have had today. It's about expanding far beyond it and contextualizing it. So the inheritance of this is not just science, but also fear and dogma. The fear of speaking up, the fear of saying, hey, there is science behind a consciousness-based perspective. And the idea that a human being can be adequately reduced to a bunch of physical parts, which is what we call anatomy today. Anatomy is how we see the patient in front of us, right? Not as human beings, of course, as human to human, we see the whole human, of course. But as physicians, the training is the human being as a machine. And we can go beyond this. So let's look at some of the signs of consciousness. Are there valid scientific theories stating that consciousness is not restricted to the brain, is not restricted to the body, is not even restricted to matter, space, and time? Or is that just pseudoscience? The answer is there are such theories. One such theory is Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory. And he started from a novel place. Unlike Abraham Flexner and many other leading scientists, he said, well, what I know fundamentally is that I am conscious, and in my consciousness, I experience all of these things. So I'm not going to presume that the brain is where it starts. And so what he did is look at properties of consciousness and match them to properties of physical systems. And he says that if there is a degree of integration there, then that gives us a measure of something that we call consciousness in that physical system. Right? So for example, here's how he said it. Once we figure out the physical system that correlates with the experience of consciousness, we calculate the quantity of integrated information, which he calls phi. The greater the value of phi, the more likely a system is conscious. That was his hypothesis, and he tested it. So he had some ideas, for example, that consciousness is fundamental. It exists from its own perspective. And so the substrate must have its own feedback loop. That's the correlate. If consciousness is fundamental, then the physical substrate should also have its own feedback loop. It's structured. Consciousness has a structure. Well, a physical structure, if it's to be conscious or have consciousness or exhibit consciousness, it should also have a very definite kind of structure. So in this way, he created 5 axioms and matched them to 5 physical postulates and measured the degree of integration, which is phi. And if phi, the higher it was, it suggests that yes, there is consciousness in this physical substrate to the extent of the number. And he found that this actually worked empirically when looking at states of the brain in wakefulness and sleep and so on. And because it worked in some of these instances, it became a subject of conversation, because if you have a theory of consciousness that seems to be working, and if the initial premise is that consciousness is not reduced to the physical property, we're just trying to measure it in the physical property, but we're not assuming that it comes from the physical. All of a sudden, that's a big deal, because almost every other popular study assumes that the brain creates consciousness. So this was written in Psychology Today. Controversially, this theory implies a form of panpsychism, that consciousness is actually a fundamental property of the universe, similar to space-time and matter. So this goes one step beyond physicalism. It's not that matter or the body or the brain create consciousness, but rather that consciousness is already existing at a fundamental level, at the level of matter. It does not need to be created. So this was a huge splash in the community and is still the subject of much conversation. Let me see here. There we go. Now there's another theory called the interface theory of perception that goes even further. It doesn't say that consciousness sits at the same level as matter, space, and time. It says it is more fundamental. And it says that matter and space and time are expressions of a deeper non-local consciousness. And this was advanced by Donald Hoffman. And his theory went like this. So he ran evolutionary game theory studies. And what he did is create these 2 agents. And one agent saw the world, saw reality, essentially. And one agent didn't. Okay, and what happened was this. The agent that survives only sees a symbolic representation of the world. The agent that sees everything dies, right? Using all the statistical models. Why? Because it's too much information. As human beings, we see a slice of the electromagnetic field. We hear a slice of the electromagnetic field. touch, taste. This entire world, though it appears vast, is an infinitesimal fraction of what is actually here. If we had to account for everything all at once, we would go extinct. We would not have the reserves to make the choices we need to survive as an individual organism. On the other hand, if we can see just a symbolic representation, a nice little interface of space, time, and matter, then we can survive, we can advance, we can grow, we can reproduce. The species can propagate, right? So the theory went like this. Natural selection favors fitness for survival, a perceptual world, not actually truth. We don't see the actual world. We don't actually see the world that is as it is. We see a fraction of it. It's an interface, hence the name, the interface theory of perception. So space and time then is an interface. They're not fundamental. So the question arises, what is then fundamental? Well, if all of the physical world is an interface, and we essentially define physicality as that which is untouched by or separate from or without consciousness, then what is left over is consciousness. And what is fundamental that is giving rise to this space-time interface is consciousness. This is the theory that was posited and is supported by his evolutionary game theory experiments. So what he says that what is fundamental is conscious agents. And through exchange of information, this information represents itself, right? Very similar to Advaita objective idealism, a representational world of physicality, space, time, matter. And by the way, the body, anatomy, bones, organs, liver, etc., are representations of a deeper reality. This is from Mundaka Upanishad, which echoes the interface theory of perception, or actually the other way around. Nadatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. So nadatra suryo, so there neither the sun shines, nor the moon shines, nor the stars shine, nor lightning, nor fire. Where is this place? When it says natatra suryo, natatra, where is it? Meaning in the deeper reality. What is referred to in the interface theory of perception as the conscious agent level. In the deeper level, natatra suryo, there neither sun, nor moon, nor stars, nor lightning, nor even fire shines. Why? Because the intensity and the luminosity of that place is so great that they cannot shine. Like if I bring a small flame close to the sun, will the flame shine? No chance. Because the luminosity of the sun is so intense that that flame has no chance. Tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. Meaning that shining, after that shining is what everything else shines. So the sun shines after this place. In other words, the representational reality of the sun, the moon, all this kind of stuff shines from the original reality of consciousness. Tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. The radiance of that original reality is what appears as the illumination of everything else. It's the exact same sentiment as the interface theory of perception, which is that there is an underlying reality, which is the power source, the battery, which represents, illumines, and sustains the physical world of space, time, matter, anatomy, physiology, embryology, so on. But we have scientific theories now that support this. It is not pseudoscience, it's not quackery, it's not dogma. We physicians must find our voice. We physicians must find our voice. Because if you look at what's happening in healthcare now, all the controversies, the conversation is not being led by physicians today. Physicians, everybody in healthcare is important. Physicians are the standard bearers for the knowledge, for the research. The leading edge of research has gone so far beyond what is taught in medical school that it has become unacceptable. We must find our voice to speak up and bring this level of knowledge and integration and what it means and how it can be used. The 1925, so if the Upanishad says it, okay, right? People want to hear the physicists say it, the philosophers. Okay, the 1925 discovery of quantum mechanics solved the problem of the universe's nature, right? Physicists were led to believe the unbelievable this time, that the universe is mental. The stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a machine. These aren't new quotes, by the way. These are decades old. It is difficult for the matter-of-fact physicists to accept the fact that the substratum of everything is of mental character. Consciousness is fundamental. Matter is its pattern. We have to figure out what that means for medical science. That is what transitions this healthcare system to the new health system. What does the current model cost us? This is the quintuple aim. You must have heard of the triple aim published by the Institute of Healthcare Improvement a couple of decades ago. It's been improved, or it's been expanded to the quintuple aim. Health outcomes. Of course, if we see a human being as a machine, then of course our diagnostics and treatments are based on that anatomical, atomic model. Of course, health outcomes will be worse. Patient experience will be worse because they're seen as a machine. Of course, we have rapport as human beings, but we should not have to rely only on rapport. Our science should be elevated to match our level of humanity. Per capita cost. If we are treating 1/5 of the person, the cost to cure will, of course, be much more. Clinician well-being. If we see ourselves as machines, of course, there's a limit, there's a ceiling to the well-being. Health equity. If everything is about biochemistry and physical stuff and what's beneath the skin and cannot be known without dissection, then how can everybody access health? Because they have to go to the expert. Because they're told, well, consciousness isn't real, it's pseudoscience. Mind, yeah, it's kind of quackery. Energy body, prana, oh, that's kind of weird. Why? Because physicians are caught in that fear and dogma from 1910 that has been funded with trillions of dollars. We are not looking at the science. In fact, we are saying the stuff is pseudoscience that would actually be the science. And the stuff that we are calling science is an extremely limited version of that science. But because it's expanded through marketing, we believe that that is the true science, as opposed to a fraction of what exists. Number 2, physician moral injury. It's very popular. It used to be called burnout. It was called burnout. It was appropriately rephrased to physician moral injury. And now there are all kinds of wellness programs. Meditate, take time off, study neuroscience, all of these, right? All important, all helpful. None of it solves the problem. The problem is the education we're receiving is the actual thorn that's creating the problem of a limited idea of what a human being is, casting that upon the patient and the physician simultaneously, and then we're trying to meditate it away. But we won't question it because that is science to us and it defines us as physicians. You see the problem? It's like having a needle in your shoe. There's a needle in the shoe. And then we meditate. And then we talk about the needle and how it causes pain. We understand the physiology of pain transmission. We even take off the shoe sometimes, right? And then we put it back on and we keep working. We say, you know what? This is a lot better. This feels better. But nobody removed the needle. The needle is the ignorance of the true nature of a human being. And that has to be updated with scientific knowledge, not pseudoscience, and not with just feel-good stuff. The feel-good stuff is important. It's important to feel good. But the feeling good should not dampen our desire to address the root cause. What else does it cost us? Mental health. The majority of knowledge of mind in the world exists outside of biomedical science. I'll say it again. The vast majority of knowledge regarding the nature of mind exists outside of biomedical science. if you come to the ER and you have flank pain and a fever and you have dysuria, then I might diagnose a UTI, pyelonephritis. They'll say, "Hey, what's that, doctor?" I'll say, "Oh, it's a kidney infection." "Oh, what's a kidney?" "Oh, the kidney's over here. It filters the blood, it produces urine, it removes toxins, it keeps your electrolytes in balance." "Oh, okay. Where is it located?" "Oh, it's right here in your flank." "Okay, fine." Come to the ER, you've got a fever, you've got cough, you've got tachypnea, maybe a little bit hypoxic. "Hey, looks like you have pneumonia." I'll say, "Hey, what's that?" "What's a problem with your lung?" Right? It's a lung problem. "Lung? What's a lung, doctor?" Lung, it's an organ that filters the air. It keeps the oxygen in the body. It takes out the carbon dioxide. It keeps this oxygen exchange going. That's what the lung is. "Oh, okay. Where is that?" "It's right here in your chest on both sides." "Oh, okay. All right." You come to the ER and you have certain experiences. The doctor says, "Hey, you know what? You have a mental illness." "Mental illness, doctor? What's that?" "Mental illness is an illness of the mind." "Doctor, what is the mind?" The mind is not the domain of biomedical science. It doesn't mean we don't know anything of the mind. It doesn't mean that what we do is not good. I also treat those conditions in the ED. We use those medications. But the majority of knowledge of that mind is not in biomedical science. So I cannot give an answer as to what the mind is based on biomedical knowledge. I can create one, of course, I can get by, but there's no consensus on that. "Doctor, you don't know." "Okay, well, doctor, at least tell me, where is the mind? You know where the lung is, you know where the kidney is, where is this mind?" "Well, I don't really know that either." "So, doctor, you don't know what the mind is, nor where the mind is, but you're telling me I have a mental illness." Mental illness is not a culture-free category. A lot of the experiences are culture dependent. What is considered a problem in one culture is considered a bridge or even advancement in another culture. Many of the sages of old, if you drop them into suburban DC, they will be on medications or involuntarily admitted to hospital. This is not to minimize the suffering that people have with hearing voices or any of these experiences. There is real suffering, but we need to up-level our level of knowledge of mind and consciousness and the nature of the human being so that we can do these things more responsibly and help people as they transition or bridge to different ways. Anatomy, then, is a worldview. Frank Netter, surgeon, medical illustrator, wrote, "Anatomy does not change, but our understanding of it does. And it requires updating of the pictures. There were gaps in the portrayal of medical knowledge." So if anatomy is a fixed thing, why do you have to keep updating pictures? Anatomy is anatomy. Well, as you learn more, as you see more, as you dissect more, the knowledge increases, the anatomical model has to be updated. These look like two different species, but they're not. Why do they look different? Two different cultures, two different perceptual lenses see the one and the same Homo sapiens as very different. Chinese doctors even lacked a word for muscle. Acupuncture in the West was pseudoscience because we are entrenched in a philosophical opinion from the Flexner report that we believe is science. More models of anatomy. Are these even the same species? Yes, they are the same species. More models of anatomy. When we expand to a consciousness-based perspective, we should be able to develop a model of anatomy that makes sense of all of these in a scientific way. Ayurveda has the doshas, panchakoshas, the chakras, humors, 12 meridians, 3 dantians, 5 planes. You can go on and on. Different ways of categorizing what a human being is. All of these are anatomy. If we did not have the philosophical bias that no, only physical stuff should be anatomy, without even understanding what the word physical means. The new health system. Anoop Kumar is proposing a 5-layer system: body, mind, energy, information, and consciousness. I won't go into details here, but every healing system around the world, from Ayurveda to yoga to Siddha to allopathy, and all of the techniques, including meditation and surgery and taking pills and Rolfing and massage and acupuncture, everything can be categorized in these categories. This is the future of the next health system. We need a Rosetta Stone that translates across every system, not just puts them side by side. Integrative medicine puts them side by side. The problem is there are over 300 wellness modalities today. If you just have an option of surgery and pills, then you get some new options like meditation. That's great because it expands our choices. Then acupuncture, great. Then massage, great. You have 2 or 3 extra options. When you have 300 options, we have a new problem. How do you navigate this maze? This is actually exactly why the Flexner report was commissioned just over 100 years ago. It was to make sense of the maze, but it started from such a low level of insight that it created a new problem. That's what we have to solve today. We need a new report on the state of things and a new Rosetta Stone that can translate everything. And that can only happen when it's based in the nature of consciousness, because that is the model that's the most expansive, the most open to accommodate all of the different premises. It doesn't ask any system to change. Allopathy doesn't have to change. Meditation doesn't have to change. It can all be explained through a deeper science. But if we start and say, no, the physical stuff, it's real, that's it, everything else doesn't really make sense, it's pseudoscience, it's dead in the water. That's the old system. It's out. It's time for the new health system. Today's healthcare, public health, and traditional healing systems will move through these new core models. They will, whether they're exactly called this or they're exactly not. This is an inevitable shift. It is happening. It's why we had dominance of allopathy, then alternative medicine crept in, then complementary, then integrative. It's all heading somewhere. It's why the wellness industry is multi-billion, multi-trillion-dollar industry now. I'm not saying it's all good. I'm not saying it's all organized. I'm not saying the science is all there. It's not. But the reason the science is not all there is because we started with such a low level of science to begin with in 1910 and made that the new standard. We need a more expansive, deeper science that can actually translate all of the system, increase the rigor, the reliability, and their potential. This is how we reach a new health system that scales healing, cure, and human potential. What's our role to play? If you're interested, I'm starting a class this Wednesday, 4 sessions, right? I used to do this over 12 hours. Now I can do it in 6 hours. So if people sign up, we can do this course. It's starting this Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 4 Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, 90 minutes each. We'll talk about each of these 4 topics in detail: the state of health and healthcare, the scientific theories of consciousness, new models for health and healing, and health system leadership. My dear colleagues, it's time for us to find our voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Anoop Kumar. This was a intellectually very challenging but really wonderful lecture that I heard after a long period of time. And like any new concepts, sometimes they would be labeled as heretical, dogmatic. For a long period of time, people believed that Earth was flat. So this is the flat Earth moment for modern medicine. I won't even use the word allopathy. Modern medicine.
Yeah.
I like your idea of 5 dimensions. That's a wonderful idea. We have only 5 minutes left, so maybe we have time for a couple of questions. If people can raise their hand, then I can give people floor. I'll take only 2 questions because we have only 5 minutes. If anyone wants to ask any question, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised.
I do want to ask the question, did not know where to raise the hand, so pardon me.
Okay, go ahead.
Adityanji, Dr. Parikh, Pankaj Parikh, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay, please go ahead.
Anoopji, extraordinary presentation. I must admire you. It is a subject of my interest too for a long time. My comment is very simple here. the sages who reached the ultimate stage and experienced that reality, they never emphasized invigorating the body or managing the body in a big way, even though Ayurveda, etc., came out. Would understanding consciousness or knowing it, would it change physical management of the body, at least the body, if not of the mind? Because we got to deal with, if there is somebody with a knife injury, that's a local situation. By knowing consciousness, would that change the situation? Right? Majority of the medical illnesses, as we are uncovering, they are matter-based realities, right? They are on the basis of the matter and managed at the basis of the matter. Maybe consciousness knowing could change that at some stage, but at the moment, that doesn't look like the situation. I'll give back to you.
Yes. So the question is the consciousness-based, I'm just putting it another way, is the consciousness-based view opposed to the matter-based view? And the answer is no. What we're saying is that even what we call matter are denser levels or denser layers of consciousness. And that is why, for example, psychoneuroimmunology holds true. That's why meditation can actually affect telomere length. That's why meditation can affect vasoconstriction, right? That's why excitement can cause dilation of the pupils, for example. If the pupils were one thing called matter, and our state of consciousness was another thing called consciousness, how in the world do they interact?
The
fact that
state
they
of
interact.
the state of consciousness, is it a state of consciousness or is it a state of the mind we are talking about?
So that's exactly what we're saying. These words, see, I showed the 5 layers, right? Consciousness, mind, energy, information, consciousness. These are 5 words, but they're not fundamentally different, right? Water vapor, water, ice. They look very different. But if you change H2O, they all change, right? So to get back to your initial question, yes, changing the state of consciousness changes the body, but it does not mean that somebody comes in with a knife wound, everybody's going to sit down and meditate. That's coming from the old ideas. We can still do everything else, but as we gain more and more proficiency at the nature of consciousness, the level of mind, more and more kinds of healing will show up that we think are impossible today.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh and Dr. Anoop Kumar. I'll go to the next question. Dr. Anders Bowling. Please.
Yes, thank you.
Keep it brief, please.
I am in Stockholm, Sweden, and I'm a journalist and a podcaster and a communicator. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. I was just wondering, I mean, this is a health revolution that you're envisaging here, of course, and the whole structure, the whole infrastructure of healthcare today, or of sick care, maybe we should say, is built up from allopathy, from the physicalist view. So what needs to happen with the infrastructure of this sick care of today? I mean, hospitals and other care centers and all of this physical infrastructure and also the mental infrastructure, of course. Shouldn't this new way of looking upon the human and human health be infused in other parts of society, like in general education, maybe in politics, in organizations, other parts, because maybe we don't need these big hospitals anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you're talking about one of the biggest implications of this, in a very practical sense, is there will be a big shift in power and capacity. Because as I said, if the physical body is primary, and if that's where it's at, then we only have so much capacity to work with that. Of course, we can exercise, we can stretch, and we can do all. But beneath the skin, if you haven't dissected the body and spent so much time and understand the physiology, we're all dependent on somebody else, right? But now if the physical body is one part of it, but now I have mind, direct access, energy, direct access, information, direct access, consciousness, direct access, that's a huge power shift. That means if you take it fraction by fraction, 4/5 of what we are is directly accessible to every human being, much of it at no cost. And if we can derive the mechanisms of healing from that, which is where all of these traditional healing systems come from, all of a sudden, you actually have democratized healthcare. You actually have health equity. So yes, it actually redefines what we even understand as healthcare and a healthcare system.
The next question is from Banking Shukla, and that would be the last question as we are running out of time.
Anoop Kumar ji, koti koti dhanyavadam. This is the first of its kind I have ever experienced, because first of all, I'm not from the medical, background. I'm a engineer by profession, but always had a question. We always hear, right? Yat prinde tat brahmande, or Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. Jivo Brahma Napara. But I think you have connected the dots so nicely, today. And I'm so thrilled. And I think that's a way to go. My question to you is that, your entire presentation, I think I sense some sort of conflict between the medical, fraternity in even taking a step to, understand or make use of the ancient wisdom. Okay, and you mentioned Vedanta, right? And many even in exploring, is that the case? And my second question is that if you pursue this today, will this be accepted? Let's say, for example, you talked about, I think you mentioned, hundreds and trillions of dollars being spent on, advancing what we believe today versus, a fragment. So will that be accepted today in a what you call conscious world? What you call the most advanced world which we see today.
Yes, the truth is it will be accepted by those people who are ready for it. It's a gradient. Some will accept it, but even if we accept it, see, this is not about just accepting something. It's about working with it. It's about experimentation. It's about deriving the models. It's about application. Just accepting doesn't really change anything, right? So it's about actually doing the work and getting into it. So I think that's where we can actually come together. We don't have to believe it. Nobody should believe this, right? We should say, that's interesting. That's a hypothesis. What do those models look like and how does it change things? There we can come together. And what I want to show is there's an actual scientific basis to do that. It does not have to be belief or something else.
Right. And I'm just quoting Swami Vivekananda, very famous quote, that do not believe in anything which is not experiential.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Banking Shukla. We don't want to prolong the discussion. Okay. We don't have the time. A couple of people have requested your slides, Dr. Anoop Kumar, and you gave the reference of your website. Can you give that once again?
Yes,
so
sure.
that people can just log on to the website and access your slides.
So this is the slide deck. You can use this. And at the end, on the last slide, there's 2 additional slides at the end with additional reading if you want to look up the resources. The third to last slide has also the link for the course that begins this Wednesday.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Anoop Kumar. Wonderful lecture, very revolutionary and challenging thoughts about healthcare. People need to keep an open mind, and unless you keep an open mind, you would not be able to understand or replicate or do hypothesis testing. But if you are dogmatic in one way or the other, you will just reject it without further research. So that is where we are. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. We would have a wonderful lecture on how we live longer. So please join for that as well. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Please.